I love that picture, by the way. That's an awesome picture behind you.
I have several.
Yeah. Well, Rick, I'm honored to have you here today, and I'm excited to just have a chance to talk with you, learn a little bit more about you and what you specialize in, what you do. If you don't mind, do you mind just, I guess, what I always love to ask is, how did you get started? How did you find your way into the industry?
So, I guess it starts in Arizona, and actually had a confrontation with a girlfriend. And it didn't go well. That followed with an argument with my father. And I was 22 at the time, 22. And I said, okay, it's time to move on. I'd worked for the family for years. I grew up on a dairy farm background in agriculture and farming. And so I had a little Datsun pickup. I threw a bunch of clothes in there, and I drove to Seattle, Washington, in one of the biggest snowstorms they had ever had. And I ended up in a parking lot at a truck stop in what they call the tide flats, where all the ships and boats came into Tacoma. And I was on Pier 25 at the gas station and didn't know what I was going to do. Had no clue, had a little bit of cash, and went and got a newspaper. We still had newspapers at that time. And they wanted welders right there on Pier 24 and 25. And man, I could weld. I at least I thought I could. So I went and applied, and they put me to work right away. And I stayed at a very unritzy motel for a week. It was a new experience for me. I'd never been in the big city. I didn't know what the big cities were about. My closest thing to a big city was traveling to my grandparents in outside of Oakland, and I don't remember ever being in town or seeing anything like I was seeing now. And so it was all new, exciting, and they gave me a 12-hour a day, 7-day-a-week job, and I was making money from what I knew. And I found a little apartment. And I worked in the shipyard. I didn't have time to do anything else but put money together. And so anyway, I had come off one of the boats and was in the shop, and they had some liquid ring pumps in there. And these guys were going back and forth about them. And I was curious, so I walked over and I'm listening to the conversation. And they want these rebuilt to go to Alaska, but they didn't have anybody to rebuild those. I said I could rebuild those in my sleep. And being young and naive, I guess it came across pretty cocky. And the guy says, you could rebuild one of these. He says, how do you know anything about a liquid ring pump? And I said, well, I grew up on a dairy farm. And he says, what's that got to do with a liquid ring pump? And I said, how do you think we move the milk? That's awesome. Use liquid ring pumps on the stanchion. The milk goes into the collector on the udder, the vacuum system, and then the liquid ring pump creates the vacuum that basically milks the cow and puts it in the tank and then pumps it off into the truck. And I said, these aren't Travanis. That's what I'm used to, stainless steel Travanis, but same basic principle. And he goes, well, what can you do to them? I said, what do you want me to do to them? We take them apart and take the rotors out and weld them up and rebuild them. He goes, you can do all that. And I said, yeah. He says, I'm going to put you over here in a machine shop. And if you can rebuild these pumps, I'm going to be back in a week. I want to see what you got. And then we're going to have another conversation. I'm like, cool. Well, it was great for me because I got off the boat that was in the snow and cold. And no, we literally had 2x4s that we tried to keep dry and put under our knees so our knees weren't on the deck. So when we changed welding rods, we didn't get shocked. so
safety first. Yeah.
Right. So I'm in the shop now, and by myself. They had tools in there. They had all the parts kits, the labra seals, the bearings, everything. And I had a lathe to my disposal, all the machine shop tools. And I started rebuilding these pumps. And then another guy showed up, and he was an engineer from Alaska, from one of the facilities. And I guess he roved. And it went from facility to facility, but this was his main, where he'd bring stuff down, rebuild it, and send it back up. And so the week went by. I had the pumps all painted up on a pallet, ready to ship up north. And they used liquid ring pumps to move the fish, to pump the fish through the plant, off the boats.
Oh, really?
Yeah, liquid ring pump.
I have no idea what a liquid ring. Can you kind of explain like what that?
Okay, it's a rotary vane pump that has a suction side and a discharge side. So when operated with a three-way valve system, you can push-pull with it, or you can suck-push with it, however you want to term it. And you have the vacuum side and the discharge side. And with the three-way valve, you can take a vacuum side and pull, and then switch it to a pressure side and push, or you can discharge. And what they do is they take let's say a 12-inch line is pretty common for a fish pump. They put a spool in there, a big rubber spool that it's inside of aluminum housing. So in between the rubber and the aluminum housing, they charge it with 80 pounds of air, and it collapses the spool. And then that pressure that's discharged from the liquid ring pump pushes the fish in there, and the first fish plugs the little hole that the rubber can't plug, and it pushes it in there and seals the hole. And then now you have pressure you're building, and the other side, the suction side's pulling off the boat, pulling the suction side, bringing the fish in. Are you with me? Then you have a spool on the suction side that closes, and the discharge side opens. Now that suction stops, and the discharge pushes the fish forward in the pipe. So by doing that and going every 150 seconds, 180 seconds, opening and closing on each side with having a vacuum and a suction, you're pushing things along, and you can unload a 500,000 pound boat in about 6 hours.
And it's amazing.
Yes, sir. And anyway, long story short is that that's what they did with these pumps. And these were massive. I mean, we used like 30 horse was a large pump for a milk plant. And they were probably 12 to 16 inches in diameter. They were using 150 horse, 300 horse liquid ring pumps that were 18 to 24 inches in diameter, massive liquid ring pumps. And then they have a water injection jacket that cools the liquid ring, and that helps seal and create the vacuum on the seals. So the advantage was I really knew what to do with one. I mean, I rebuilt them at home, and you know how you play around and tinker with something. Eventually, I could just slam them together, and they just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. And so this man, I'll share his name. He's a great guy, still in the industry. Steve Arbor. He was the chief engineer of chief engineers. So every engineer in every plant, he was their boss. And he showed up a week later, and he's a big, tall, lengthy English guy. Talked with the English accent. It was real unique for me. I'd never been around a real English person. You know, it was just way cool, and his mannerism and the terms he used, it just intrigued me. And so Steve says, I'd like to send you to Akutan. And I'm like, what is Akutan? He goes, well, it's an island out in the middle of the Pacific, about 70 miles northwest of Dutch Harbor. What is Dutch Harbor? Dutch Harbor's we have a large seafood plant there. And I'm like, cool. And I said, where's that located? He said, Alaska. Oh my gosh, I'm going to Alaska. You know, this, so I'm all about it. I mean, I have nothing to tie me down. I have no obligations. And I jump in a plane. I hadn't been on a plane in years since I was a tiny kid.
What time period is this roughly? Like what years roughly?
Well, 23. This has to be the mid 80s. Oh, so anyway, I get on this plane and I fly into Anchorage. And that was my first experience of flying in weather and snow. And they put me on what they call the milk run. And it's either flight 60 or 61. I've flown hundreds of flights on those planes. And it went from Seattle to Ketchikan to Wrangell to all these little product towns. And I mean, you were up and down, up and down. I've been on the shortest 737 flight, which is from Wrangell, Alaska to Ketchikan.
Okay.
You literally go up to 10,000 foot and come straight back down.
Really?
I mean,
that's awesome.
Oh yeah. And then you take off into a mountain. Well, I was getting all these experiences, and it was just really super cool. And I knew right away I didn't like to fly. I didn't have control. So it worried me. You know, I just didn't like to fly, but
yeah.
I didn't realize how much I would be flying over that. So then I get to Anchorage, Alaska, and I jump planes. I get on another 37, and I head down towards Dutch Harbor. And it was midday at that time. I got a day flight in, and they were talking about how all the flights couldn't get in through the morning the night before because of weather. And we're flying around up there, and the guy next to me was a refrigeration guy of all people.
Really?
I'll never forget. Yes, his name was Buzz Grayson. He's long passed and gone. He was my original mentor for refrigeration. Anyway, he's sitting next to me, and he was having his fun and doing the little hazing. And we're circling around, and I'm looking down there, and he goes, "That's the runway." And the runway starts at water and ends at water. And you're just going, are you freaking kidding me? And so he goes, well, we're coming down to the runway, and it's kind of rough and bumpy, and he's telling me not to worry. And he says, he's pointing at the cowl to the engine, and he says, all you want to know is that thing doesn't come apart or blow apart, we're good to go. And about that time, that thing split open, wide open, and just went boom. And all of a sudden we hit the ground, and it's the brakes. It's the back of the cowl that opens up and catches the air and puts the brakes on the aircraft. And he had me believing we were done, you know?
That's hilarious, man.
Oh, Buzz became my best friend.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this podcast, this video content. If you are, and you want to see other content just like this, join us at industrialjobsnetwork.com. It's a great place to connect with others in the food manufacturing industry. That means ammonia refrigeration, industrial maintenance, automation controls, process safety management, electrical, all those types of roles. Join us, be a part of the team. Best part is you get access to employer-sponsored training. This is industry-specific certificate training. It's a great opportunity to connect with others, grow your career, and take your job, your career to the next level. I hope to see you there. industrialjobsnetwork.com. Take care.
Anyway, there I was in Akutan, and I went into the airport, and the airport's so small, you got people sleeping on the floor, and at this time it's post 9/11, so there's no TSA or anything like that, and there's a bar, everybody's got the bar packed, and it's snowing, it's icy, and just roughneck people. I mean, just a whole new environment to me. And so Buzz says, where are you going? I said, I'm going out to Akutan. He says, oh, me too. He says, what do you do? And I said, well, I don't know. I'm a mechanic of some kind. And he goes, oh, you're going to work in maintenance. He says, I do refrigeration. And I'm like, okay, cool. And he says, well, they should have the Goose out here in a minute. And I go, the Goose? And he goes, that's what we're flying on out to Akutan. And I'm like, okay, what's a Goose? He goes, it's a little float plane made in 1944 for World War II. And I'm going, what? So we're watching out the window, and here comes this amphibious plane that holds 6 passengers pulling up, and they send us out there. There were 3 of us and some boxes and stuff. And we got on this plane, and I'm like, this is like surreal, out of a movie. And I get in this plane. Now, mind you, from Dutch Arbor to Akutan is 20 minutes. 26 minutes, I think, was the total flight in good weather. And we got out there. It wasn't terrible weather. It was a little socked in. I didn't see the bay when I came in. We poked through the clouds, landed on the bay, and here we go up this ramp that's kind of out in the middle of nowhere with this little shack, and there's a guy there on the ATV. And we get out of this plane, grab our bags, and we get in the ATV, and it takes us along this mountain, and we go around back in to a cove, and here's this humongous seafood plant. And I'm in awe, because I've never seen any of this. And they took me in and took me upstairs and introduced me to Charlie Sweeney, who was the chief engineer at the time. He'd been doing it for years. He was a laid-back old country boy, so we got along really well. And there was the assistant chief in there, which was Carl Erickson at the time. He's long retired too. All these guys are either passed or retired. Anyway, and then they took me over to the laundry where I got linens and blankets. And then being an engineer, we got our own rooms. And so I take that back. We didn't get our own rooms. We got a room we shared with our own bed with a shift differential. In other words,
where you kind of rotate.
Yeah, every 12 hours.
Yeah.
So you either work day shift or night shift, and obviously being the new guy, I went straight to night shifts. I didn't see the sun for almost 5 years.
Did you?
Except for when I rotated. Sun sets
awesome.
at 3:30 in the afternoon, rises at 11 in the winter months.
Man.
Anyway, and it's a smaller surimi cod plant, salmon plant, and I meet Alan. Alan is currently the chief engineer of Akutan.
Today, right now.
Today,
Awesome.
right now. Yeah. I'd never done anything with ammonia, except for that helping Ray and Buzz. And he asked me, what do you know about ammonia? And I said, nothing. And so he took me out into the engine room. And at that time, we had rotary fullers. Now, good luck at finding one nowadays. There's some here and there. They're rotary vane refrigeration compressors.
Yeah.
And Frick made one, Fuller made one. There's a couple other ones. I think Viking even made one at one time. Anyway, and he says, this thing seized up, it didn't have the right oil, and I need you to rebuild it. I'm like, okay. And so I got the manual. I started tearing the thing apart. The rotor's like 24 inches in diameter. It has the slats that go in there. That's the rotary vane.
Had you ever done that before, or is this kind of your first go at something like that?
I'd never touched anything like this, but I had worked on vacuum pumps and stuff back home and rotary vane pumps. So to me, it was the same exact thing, except for way bigger. You know what I mean? Same working components. So it didn't intimidate me, and I just went to town on it. I did what they told me. I read the manual, and I got to the mechanical seal, and they're telling me about all this, how intense the mechanical seal is. And at that time, that mechanical seal was $1,000. And I just thought that was phenomenal. I didn't want to touch it, because it was $1,000. I mean, that's 2 weeks' pay for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I learned a couple real unique things working with Alan. He started slowly teaching me about ammonia, and he took me over to the PowerHouse. And there was old 16-cylinder 379. They don't. Good luck at finding one of these. Caterpillar engine. He says the air start in this needs to be rebuilt. Here's the kit. Rebuild this. It was like he was throwing stuff at me just to see where I would go. And so I'm in this quiet part of the plant next to the power generation room, and I'm rebuilding this. It's basically a hydraulic motor that works on air. And I knew hydraulics, so what piece of tractor farm equipment doesn't have hydraulics on it of some kind. Rebuilt it, and then he come in there, we hooked it up to the air, and we fired that machine off and got it running. It was one of the coolest things. I'd never seen a 16-cylinder engine. So then he took me into the PowerHouse, and here were these 3516 state-of-the-art Caterpillar 200SA gen sets that were kicking out 1200 kW a second. You know what I mean? I mean, they were just bad machines to me. Intercoolers and, just the kind of rah. I was just like, he goes, I need you to run the PowerHouse. This guy's leaving in a couple weeks to learn everything you can. This guy's throwing power factor at me, eye synchronization, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, it took a few days, but he taught me how to synchronize the engine. Have you ever heard of ISOC, eye synchronization?
No.
So I'll simplify it real quick.
Yeah.
Clock runs at 60 minutes, 60 seconds, right? 60 seconds is one cycle. Okay. So in order to match something that's generating power, you have to blend into that cycle. And you have to get it in eye synchronization to where one's leading and one's lagging by milliseconds. And the way you do that is speed pots. You speed them up or you speed them down by the hertz, by the frequency. So 60 hertz is what you're running at, if that makes sense to you. Yep. If you drop below 59, it's going to kick out. It's going to kick it offline. If you go over 61.8, it's going to kick it out. So you typically didn't have to mess with the speed pots because they were set up, but you had this big breaker. And what you do is you watch the needle go around the 60 seconds, and it comes around, and when it gets to the top, there's two big white lights. And when they light up, you throw that breaker. And if you time it right, that machine comes online. And it was quite the thrill to learn all this stuff and get involved in that. And
it's crazy how they would just throw you into these huge, complicated projects. That's
They didn't have anybody. And this is where we're at today. This is part of my drive. I came through this and lived through it and got educated. And so I'll share one thing that got me in trouble with learning that stuff. Years later, I went back to Akutan, and I was running the PowerHouse there. I had learned that if you take the cycles up to that 61.8, the clocks move faster. And if you did it right, in a 12-hour shift, you could advance the clocks by 15 minutes, and I could get off shift 15 minutes early because all the clocks in the plant would be 15 minutes faster. I'd slow them back down for the shift by bringing it down to 59.2.
That's hilarious. For the next shift.
I got caught by Steve Arbor. And that's why Steve Arbor and I have a special relationship, because he was always catching me at mischief, but it was something unique that nobody else would know or could figure out.
That's awesome.
He just thought that was the funniest. At the same time, he wanted me to know I couldn't be doing it. It was a different relationship. I was left with a guy who was a diver that had very minimal ammonia experience, and now I got to run the plant.
How old are you roughly at this time?
24, 25.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that's young.
26. No, go 5 years. 22, 27. 27.
That's still young. That's still.
So I hadn't had my daughter. I take that back. I did have my daughter at that point. So I have to be 36 at that point in time. Gosh, man, how everything just blends. I'm like 36 by that time.
Okay.
Because my daughter was born when I was 36 in 2000. Gosh dang, man. Anyway, so I'm at Sandpoint, and I'm thinking, well, the refrigeration's running fine. We know how to turn the blast freezers off and on. Then they quit. We didn't have no more fish. We had to shut the blast cells down, so we had to shut the compressors down. Well, that's fine. Well, the diver dude went on vacation. Well, we ain't going to see much fish. Salmon season ate for a couple more weeks. There's not really going to be no need except for keeping the machines we had running for the cold storage. Well, lo and behold, we got some fish. We had some halibut come in, and I had to fire up the two Mycoms. Well, I went over to the first Mycom, and I fired it up. It started, and it ran for a couple minutes, and it shut down. And I'm looking at the alarms, and it says oil. I'm looking in the sight glass. There's no oil in the machine. So I go get a barrel of oil. I bring it. I fill the machine back up with oil. It took 2.5 barrels to fill that machine up. Okay. So I start the machine back up. It runs. It runs for 3 or 4 minutes. It shuts down. No oil. Now I'm in over my head. There's nobody in the plant that can help me. I call and wake Steve Arbor up in the middle of the night. Listen, dude, I've lost all my oil. Oh, yeah, that's right. That one doesn't have a good check valve, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. He goes, so you only did it one time? I said, no, I've done it twice. He goes, what? And he's kind of giving me the barky. And I said, yeah, I lost 4 barrels into the system. And he's going, oh, it's going to come back. It's going to come back. And I had no clue what he was talking about. And so I went and got the oil, put it back in, and imagine how crappy cell phones were then, to where even going to the office, I'm trying to talk to them. And the gist is, once you fire the machine up, you got to close the suction, fire the machine up, and crack the suction line up, go about 2 or 3 turns, let it build pressure, and then spin that suction line up. Had no clue what I was doing, but that's what I was supposed to do. It worked. It came online. Everything's beautiful. We're up. We're freezing halibut. I get a couple blast cells going. I go to bed. They wake me up at 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. We got problems. The engine room shut down. The blue lights are going off. So ammonia alarms another thing that's been kind of lost in it. But if you read up, ammonia alarms are supposed to be blue in color. Okay. Yeah, it's a standard, and they get away with the yellow ones, but they've kind of tweaked the standard and how it works. But so the blue lights are all going off, and at that time they were big cherries like on the top of the old cop cars. So you got these blue lights going off, and the engine room's lit up, and all the processors, everybody's looking down there to see what's going on. You got the ammonia horn. I didn't know how to shut it off. I didn't know how to reset it, and high leveled in the LTR. So again, I call Steve, wake him up early in the morning. Yeah, you're high leveled, all the oil's come back. And I'm like, so what do I do? He goes, you got to get it out of there. So he's explaining to me over the phone in a noisy engine room how to take oil out of an oil pot. Well, the oil's too cold. So then I have to go get a heater, and I got a salamander heater. Now listen, all this stuff that I did back then, if somebody saw me do it today, would just freak out. So I got a salamander heater on this oil pot, heating it up, burning all the ice off. And 36 hours later, I got the engine room up and running, but I got it up and running. And I took bucket after bucket. When oil comes out of an oil pot, it's foamed up. So what he told me to do was take a TIG rod and stir it, and it pops the bubbles, and you can get more and more oil. And I did that until I took 3.5 barrels of oil out of the system. Crazy madness. I was so sick of ammonia. Got it up and running. The lo and behold, the diving dude that liked to go around the world diving showed back up. He's back from vacation. He can take over. Steve says you need to take a break. I get out of there, get on the Goose to Dutch Arbor. I fly what they call the flying seagull. It's a 21 passenger. Everybody sits on one side of the plane. Into Anchorage, and I call Steve and I go, listen, I hate the smell of that ammonia. I don't ever want to smell it again. He goes, someday you're going to change your mind about that. So I'll share with that later. But that was our conversation. I just was, it was like drinking an alcohol that you've had too much of, and just the smell of it,
Just too much. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I get on the plane, I go to Seattle, I go to my vacation. Years later, I'm flying to Dutch Harbor for another project. Nothing to do with Trident at that time. I think it was a big Lucian Privilege Indian Corporation. And I'm up in the air and I'm thinking about the plants, and I could smell ammonia. You have the memory of ammonia, and I'm missing it. It was really almost like a drug-induced. I gotta have me some of that. You know what I mean? And I was like, son of a bitch, he's right. And
that's hilarious.
Oh yeah. So that was my learning of ammonia, and I still didn't operate. I kind of operated in that plant, and it wasn't until I was it Ocean Beauty? I'm trying to think. The first plant I actually operated in, I had enough ammonia experience that they would take me as a level 1 operator pretty much anywhere. And it was the boat. So I went on the Ocean Peace.
Oh, okay.
In the off season, I jumped on a dragger, and it was Freon, but plate freezers, factory. And I was a second engineer, and I got acclimated to the refrigeration system. We had some recips, and then a 250V Micom. Micom seems to stuck around on the West Coast. And started operating and learning more. There was a guy named Mike Rea. Mike Rea was barely 5 foot, and he was an engineer of a big ocean-going dragger. And he lived in Florida, and his passion was 914 Porsches and football game and the nightlife. He was the coolest guy ever.
I love it.
And so he trusted me. He would always ask me, what do you think, Rick? And he had me in a way that I would not eagerly give him an answer. I would think about what I had to say and say, well, I think, he's going, let's do that. And it was the coolest relationship. And then we had another second engineer, because we did 12-hour shifts on the boat, and he was teaching me everything. I stayed on shift with him for a few days and then switched back over to my shift. And I can't remember, Chris's dad was the chief engineer of the Seafreeze, which is a big company now. It used to be just a boat. It was one of the first diesel electric fishing boats. And Chris's dad was the engineer. I got to work with him later on for a season on the little bitty boat we were on together. He was teaching me to be a main engineer.
How did you like being on boats versus doing land type operations?
So I don't mind being on the boats, but it's a young man's game and it's very tight quarters.
I can imagine.
if you eat too much, you're not going to make it on a boat like that because you're going to get stuck. And it'll toss you around quite a bit. I left the OP because we were in 30-foot seas down past the 2, which is the last island in the chain before you're in Russian waters. And we lost the main, and we lost the red gear oil pump. The red gear is the big main gear between the main engine and the genset. And there's a little pump down in there, and it has 6 dowels in there that drive the pump. So there's dowel pins that go into the flywheel, and then they go into the little pump, and then that pump lubricates the big red gear. We got everybody in engineering. We left the gear in the water because now we have no main engine. We're floating in the water in 30-foot seas with waves crashing over the back because they're pushing us. The gear's in the water anchoring us, and we got to split the genset from the main engine. And I'm like, so why don't we just get a tug and get a tow? We can't. We're 22 hours from the nearest tug, and they're not coming out in that weather. Blah, blah, blah. So now I'm nervous because everything from the starboard side of the engine room is now on the port side, vice versa, because we're getting tossed around. At one point in time, we dipped the handrail of a 3-story high main deck in the water. Yeah. And so we got a lot of ballast. That was a 400-ton boat. We got a couple hundred tons of product. So as long as we don't get a hole in the boat, we're just going to bob. And they made a believer of me that. So I trusted him and my fellow seamen that had been there way longer than I had. And we got this part. We got down there. Mike got the pump off. He was the smallest he could fit down there. And he goes, now we
So what's that like down? I mean, so the boat's rocking like this and you guys are changing these huge components down there as the boat's moving around? Like,
yeah, you flow with it. You just kind of go with it. You have no choice. I mean, you can fall down and slide around on the floor if you want, So I go up in the machine shop, which is off to the on one side of the boat where the hydraulic pack room is. And I'm going through material, and the hardest material we have was Manel. Manel is what they make props out of. I've actually taken that piece of Manel from Magone. Now, I don't know if you ever watched the Discovery Channel. The Magone family was the big welding shop, boat repair. They salvaged boats. They were into guns. They had a gun shop and a barge there in Dutch Harbor, still do as far as I know. And they were on Discovery for some of the shows of salvaging big boats and the craziness that they did out there in the water. I went down and negotiated with them and traded some things, and we bought our guns and ammo. We were disappointed in 2006 when they passed a law you couldn't have more than 5,000 rounds per weapon. Anyway, I'm being funny. So guns are serious out there. And so, long story short, I attempt to make these dowels out of Manel. They're about a half-inch long, inch and a half long, and half-inch in diameter. And I put them on the lathe, and I don't know what you know about milling and tooling. Manel's super, super hard. And I'm tearing up all my tooling. And it was all I could do to get 6 rough cut dowels. One big long one, and then cut it up into chunks. And we hammered them in there and got them in there, got the pump back on there, bolted it up. We're talking 16 hours later, and we're firing off the main engine that does all. So this is a 9-cylinder Bergen, which is a Rolls-Royce engine with 18-inch pistons. And its rated speed is 750 RPM. Slow, big lug-to-lug-to-lug diesel engine. And single main. And that's one of the reasons I got off the boat. I was never going to be on a single main engine. The company didn't want to pay for parts. It was a Cracker Jack fishing company at the time that we worked for. They've since been bought out by better people. Remember the Moody's? The Christian, the Moody's, they weren't Holly Krishna, but the Moody's believed in tithing. You took 10% of the check no matter what. Yeah. They were the Christians. They bought into the seafood industry and they owned our boat at the time.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I never gave any paycheck up, bro. I worked for my paycheck. Anyway, so put it up, fired up, got it going. And then when I rotated out, I never went back to that boat. It was just, it was too.
I don't blame you.
For me.
That's crazy.
You find out what kind of man you are. When you're in 30-foot seas and you look out that porthole and you go down into a wave and you look at the wall that you're surrounded by, you know how small you are. On the flip side of that, I used to smoke. I haven't smoked in a long time, but I used to smoke religiously, and cigarettes were a big deal. You could buy them on duty free, no taxes, as long as you were out in the water. And I would go up on the gantry where all the rigging went through the back and have a cigarette. And I can remember being up there on a full moon night, flat calm sea, looking at glass going, how many people get to see this in their lifetime? You can see every star there is. You got a full moon with the reflection going across the ocean, and all that you see is the ripple of the drag going out the back where the purse net is, or the drag net is. And surreal moments you just never will forget. And
did you guys ever run into any accidents? I mean, any releases, back in that time period that you were part of?
Oh yeah, 2007, and I only remember that because I bought a new Harley, and it was a 2006 Street Glide, and I had a psycho girlfriend down in Seattle, Washington, that worked for SSA of all places, Social Security Administration.
Oh, okay.
And she was so psycho. They actually the Judge Judy show called me to go. They were going to pay for everything for me to leave Dutch Harbor, go down to LA, and go to their show because she felt she owned half of that Harley Davidson.
Oh, really?
Yeah, dude.
And she's a girlfriend. She's not. They're married. Yeah, no, that's. I love your story. It's fascinating. I mean, to hear firsthand, especially at that time period. What life was like, because things have changed quite a bit from then till now.
Think about this. All that was 30 years ago.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy how much time it.
Years ago, huh? Yeah. And I get drawn back there over. Recently, I was helping with a project. They're going to revive a boat called the Yard Arm Knot. That's where Buzz Grayson came from. He was the original engineer for refrigeration on the Yard Arm Knot.
What is that? The Yard Arm Knot? I'm not.
The Yard Arm Knot was an old frigate they turned into a floating processor, and it got decommissioned years ago. It's in Dutch Harbor, but it's tied up to the docks. It's seaworthy to where it won't sink.
I've heard about this before. I'm sorry for interrupting. I've heard about
that.
But that's all
You're probably more familiar with the one in Kodiak, Alaska, that ran aground. That used to be. It still is an Ocean Beauty. It used to be a Trident plant. Trident gave it up to Ocean Beauty. I think Ocean Beauty has it now. So little tidbit of trivia. My wife's uncle was probably the most famous fisherman in Alaska. His name was Oscar Dyson. The NOAA boats up there, National Ocean. Actually, there's only one now, and it is the Oscar Dyson. And they had all Alaskan seafood, I believe. And the boat was the Peggy Joe back in the day. And his wife started the marine weather forecast. She would call out to him every 4 hours with the weather, and that developed into what we know today. When the Coast Guard calls out and goes, Katirte, this is marine weather forecast, mean wave, blah, blah. She's the originator of that. And here's a really cool part. My wife, when she got out of high school, would go up to Alaska for the summers and stand in when my aunt was sick. And so we got a lot of cultural history up there as far as on her side. And then I just worked up there forever, I thought. So yeah, it brings back. We were just talking about, we actually had a conversation a week ago about if we went back there, and she was like, well, if we just went for the season, and I'm like, nah, it's too cold, too hard. I'm an old man.
Yeah.
It's exciting. And I love the fishing industry. I love seafood, period. Good fresh seafood is really great. Anyway, we got a lot of family still in the industry, work in the industry, and obviously I, do the refrigeration side of things. So that was my first, in fact, that was the first time I got training in refrigeration. We'd go in the break room next door, get our cookies and cakes or whatever the processors we're getting, our coffee and tea, and then we'd go in there and we'd have discussions about how things worked and why they worked. And I mean, that guy put a mental picture in my head, and he taught me how to see into the pipe. Yeah. Just so grateful for it. And he was very practical. He knew his stuff. He was very patient, and he allowed me to make mistakes and guided me in a way that I wish I could have been more like him. He since, I don't know where he is anymore. He had a heartbreak in his life and kind of left the industry and was on a sabbaticus to find himself or whatever the deal might be. But he pops up now and then. His brother has worked in the industry, same type of demeanor. He's more of a go-getter, more of a roughneck, and he runs a plant in Dutch Harbor there, which is the old, what was the name of that place? I've been in all the famous bars that you've seen throughout Dutch Harbor, the Elbow Room, Latitudes, there's Because the only place I could get an Easy Rider magazine was at Carl's. Carl's was a bar, restaurant, store inside of what was that seafood company? They're no longer. They had two major plants up there, and they've been bought out. Now it belongs to Copper River, I believe. Copper River Seafoods and their conglomerate with Pat Coast. But Carl's, I can tell you stories about going in it for $5. The taxi, which could either be a limousine or a Humvee, would take you anywhere to any bar. And it didn't matter how many guys you stuffed in there, but $5, and she ran all night long. She bought a limousine, a Hummer, and she had something else. I don't remember what it was. And she was the local taxi, huh?
That's amazing, man. That's cool.
Anyway, so I've met anybody on the Deadliest Catch I've worked with at some point in their time or worked on their boat. Andy and his brother off the Time Bandit. I was that little window I was just talking about looking out. Here come the Time Bandit in, the offload crab, and that's when they started the quotas. That's when there was no more cowboy on the water, and they did the allocation to each boat for quotas. It was first season that. It was terrible. To start up a crab line, the amount of people and everything for 20,000 pounds of crab, ridiculous. And they came in and they had a well, pictures of this somewhere, had a whale skull on the back of the boat.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, they gave it to the museum there in Dutch Harbor. And I went down and started talking with Andy, and he says, Jonathan, he's going to need an engineer. Our engineer's going in for hernia operation. Now, this is before the Deadliest Catch and all that. Actually, right into the first season, because we filmed the first season and half of the first season and into the second season. And I was their engineer.
Were you really?
When they started.
That's amazing, man.
Catch. And
that's cool.
So to put it a little more in play, is my wife's aunt has a bed and breakfast on the Homer Spit, and that's where Andy and his brother are from.
Okay.
And there's a little bar down there. God, what was the name of that place? But their boat ties up at docks down there. That's Homer, Alaska. So that's a straight shot down to Kodiak, down the chain. Blah, blah. I knew Edgar better than I knew Sig. Sig was a drug addict. I mean, I can't say it any other way. He's created some waves over the years. I'm sure if you watch the show, he got in trouble there at Fish Expo one year because he sold crab to the Russians while we were on strike. And yeah, I could tell you all kinds of different stories about the political. I'd leave Dutch Harbor for the season. Now, this was seasonal jobs, constantly getting seasonal jobs. And I go down to Seattle, and I get a call from Tracy Abbott. Didn't know who she was. She told me her uncle was Jim. I don't remember Jim's last name. Owner of Seattle Refrigeration. I go, oh yeah, I know you guys. You've done contracts with us. Yeah, I know you guys. She goes, I want you to go to work for me. I'm like, okay, doing what? She says, refrigeration. And I said, okay, you have a plant? She says, no, we do service work. And I'm like, okay, I've never done service work. She goes, well, we're the only non-union shop in the area right now. At that time, not Johnstone as they know it today, but Johnstone was the biggest competitors in the ammonia industry was Seattle Refrigeration and Johnstone. There was nobody else. On the East Coast, it was Stellar and Republic, and there's one more over there. Anyway, but they were the big boys. They were the big bad boys. And Tracy was a big wig for Costco. She had an alternative lifestyle, which made it kind of unique meeting her. Didn't bother me none. I was just her favorite all of a sudden. And she put me together with a guy named Mike Ivers. He, prima donna is the only description of Mike Ivers. And anybody in the world that has ever met him would tell you so. And I got a different side of ammonia teaching on the service end. We went up to Alaska. In fact, we were in Ketchikan, putting some freezer plates and compressors in a plant. And Mike was I'm going to tell you how it's done, but I'm only going to tell you once. And if you don't get it the first time, then I ain't wasting my time with you no more.
Oh, jeez.
And
Yeah.
I remember flying into Ketchikan, and he didn't fly on the flight that me and the rest of the construction crew flew in. And we all went to the plant. They gave us rooms in the bunkhouse. And he comes storming in the bunkhouse. What are you doing in here? We don't sleep in bunkhouses. And he made me go to the motel in town with him. And at that time, he was driving the new Dodge. Oh, man, this big fancy. This is like 2006 at this time. Big fancy Dodge truck. He'd rent it. And he says, you need to get a rental car. And I'm like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Where's your company credit card? I don't know. I don't have one. And he really put me up a notch. And we did the project. And I went back to Seattle and I said, Tracy, I don't know about all this credit card stuff. And there's, Steve Arbor said some things to me over the years. Different people you work with give you pieces of advice or say something to you. And this was one of those times. Tracy took me over to the casino near where the old shop was and bought me lunch. And she says, Rick, you undersell yourself. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, you're worth so much more. She goes, I want to put you in charge. I lived in Oregon. My home was outside of Portland, out at Seaside. And she goes, I want to put you in charge of a division.
Wow.
And, I had my supervising experience with running the crews at the plants. And I knew enough about the construction side of stuff, that the maintenance side. Keep in mind, what doesn't happen in these plants today, we did everything from that valve behind you is an S4A. Oh, look right behind you. See that solenoid valve?
Yeah,
that's an S4A. Tell me what the top says on.
Let me see. Here. Yeah.
So that's
RS. Let me see if I can read it.
No, look at the top data plate, the silver plate. Oh, it's gone.
Yeah, I don't know if that's.
So that valve is an S4A solenoid valve, single actuating solenoid valve. Anyway, we would take those apart and rebuild them. Any valve we had in the plant, we had kits for, 2 and 3 kits, and repeatedly ordered kits. They don't do that anymore. We had to rebuild them. We couldn't get parts there fast enough to put them in place. And during that time, RS became Parker. And things changed. And Parker's later on by Sporlan. And then, because there was RS, Sporlan. Anyway.
Are you working out in Alaska or in the Seattle
I'm down the Oregon
area?
coast. I'm working Portland all the way down to the top. One of my accounts was Homo Creamery in California, very top of California.
Cool. Yeah.
And Tracy gets cancer and passes. The company gets dissolved. I don't know what to do. My support is crushed. They start building a local seafood plant. They invite me to come in to be their project manager. And I'm like, I don't know nothing about project management. Taiwanese company from Taiwan, Highland Refrigeration out of Seattle, Washington. They're still going today. Lars Mathieson knew of me through Seattle Refrigeration. He was the Sabro rep, a lot of Sabros in the boats and stuff, in the barges, through the plants, and they were the go-to for parts and everything, and I developed a really good relationship. And he introduced me to Chi, a little Asian that couldn't keep a driver's license and was always in trouble for driving from Seattle down to Oregon on a suspended license in his big BMW, and put me in charge of everything. He said, build the plant. And so I got really involved with building the plant. We did sardines, built some blast freezers. I got an education. He wanted to add on to the plant, and long story short is he did some things he wasn't supposed to. They caught the plant on fire. They had uncertified welders welding on the piping at night when I wasn't there. We ended up with the county inspector sitting at a conference table with us, telling us what we needed to do. Chi, being Asian, didn't understand. We can't just do what we want to do. And he told me if I didn't have welders in there welding tonight, that I would lose my job. I said, gee, you don't want to do that. Let's end this conversation. We'll talk about it after this gentleman leaves. And she says, no, you're fired. Worst thing he could have done in front of a county inspector. He fires me over safety issues, blah, blah. 2 weeks later, they were handing me a check for $20,000 and saying, we're sorry. And
really? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that guy, that Jim Byerly, I think, man, I remember names, was the county inspector. The port that we were on, the pier that we were on, it was a big deal because it had caught on fire and burnt to the ground. So it was kind of a heated issue, you know. It didn't burn to the ground. It burnt quite a bit of the dock and everything years earlier. And compliance is in its prime at that time. And you just didn't mess around. And she didn't get that. It cost him more in some other lawsuits and fines over the years. I still have family there.
Hey, Rick, let me ask you this. I mean, the one thing I'm hearing is, like, throughout your career, you've been thrown into situations where you didn't really know how to do it, like rebuilding the compressors and rebuilding the gen sets, and then working as a project manager. I mean, but over and over, it seems like you kind of been thrown in these situations. How mentally, how does someone do that? Because I mean, that's something I think everybody has got to experience at some point, and a lot of people will kind of refrain, they'll pull back because I'm not prepared, I'm not ready. But it seems like you were just kind of just throwing yourself in there. Can you kind of just expand a little bit on, like, how does someone do that?
So that's one of the sayings that Steve Arbor said to me at one point in time. He was talking about me going to a facility out in the middle of nowhere, and I said, I want a break. I want away from everything where it's nice and quiet. He goes, you can't do nice and quiet. You need excitement. You need busyness. You need chaos, not good chaos. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To operate, you're built for it. And, very few companies can appreciate that. It conflicts with the standard industry of the straight and narrow and the fine line of doing everything by the book. I think because my dad believed that I needed to have a skill set and drove me. So I wanted to weld. 12 years old, I want to weld. Everybody at school is talking about how they weld on their farm, their ranch. We got all this stuff. I want to learn how to weld. He gave me a 1/4 inch plate, 6 inches by 6 inches. He said, there's a box of 70-18 and 60-10 right there. The old rod, you can do whatever you want with it. When that plate's 1 inch thick, you come talk to me. That's how my dad did things. His reasoning was always, don't think, use your head. It took me years to figure that out, but that was my dad in a nutshell. So his driven.
What does that mean to you? Don't think, use your head. Like,
well, so as a child, when your parent says, why did you do that? And you say, well, I thought, my dad's rebuttal to that was, don't think, use your head, because my thinking got me in trouble. Mm-hmm. It evolved into pay attention, figure out what you're doing, know what you're doing before you do it.
Yeah.
Don't just dive in. And I think that's mostly where I'm at today. Okay, I'm getting ready to do a new project.
Yeah.
It's cold storage. I've done several cold storages for other companies as the service liaison, the startup commissioning, the oversight of the construction crews. I know how to build a cold storage. But now I'm doing it for myself, and I'm doing it for people who are personable to me, that, I'm on my own, it's my bread and butter, and I want them to have state-of-the-art, but cost-effectively. And so I spend hours researching how different cold storages are, different standards, requirements, the concrete, the foam, the insulation, and the vapor barrier, and what works and what doesn't work, the pros and cons, and the affordability of it all.
Yeah.
And I'll take something like that and combine two things. When I was in the Bahamas, I learned about underfloor air. So they blow air under the cold storage floor to keep it at 50, 60 degrees because it never gets cold there.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying? So they want to maintain where if you go to Illinois, they're running glycol loops and they got PEX in the floor. And so I try to understand, again, Michael's statement of thinking like an engineer. I don't have to be an engineer on paper to know how things work.
Yeah.
So I'll research things and through my own experience and knowledge of what I've seen firsthand. Let's go back to when Ray took the sulfur stick and he put it down there and it burned his eyebrows off. That was funny at the time, but there was a lesson there for me to know. For years, they taught, in fact, only up until maybe 12 years ago, 15 years ago, they taught ammonia wasn't flammable, wasn't explosive.
Really? Yeah.
Yes. And
Wow.
well, the placard used to read 003. Now it's 013. Is it 013? Either way, it's the flammability is there now. So what nobody paid attention to at the time, because there was no research or really concern about it, was you got oil in the system that migrates through the system. So the oil is entrained in the ammonia. So when the ammonia comes out of the pipe, it's spraying ammonia and oil. So now the flammability mixed with the right 25% oxygen makes it very volatile and explosive. So what happened to Ray was he had an ammonia leak that was low. Oil in the system goes to the low point, and it was aspirating oil at the same time it was bleeding out of ammonia. And that little flame on the end of that sulfur stick ignited the oil in the plume or the cloud that was coming out of that pipe, and that's what burned his eyebrows off.
Okay.
People talk about ammonia. One of the most interesting conversations I have regularly is I'll run into an HVAC guy. I'll get a little bit of their background, and I said, well, how would you like to come over to the dark side and do some anhydrous ammonia? And their response is always the same. I don't want to die. And this is my point to a T. What do you mean you don't want to die? Well, ammonia will kill you. Sure, Freon will too. And here's the irony. Ammonia will run you out, and it's self-alarming, and make you aware long before it will kill you. Where Freon will put you to sleep and kill you, and you won't know it happened.
Yeah.
So what's the trade-off of doing Freon? It's oxygen depleting in these smaller spaces that you go into, these kitchens and stuff. You put yourself more at risk than I do with the ammonia. On the most part, from a day-to-day perspective. And so it's not that one's better than the other, but it's equally as important to be safe with ammonia as it is with Freon or vice versa. Obviously, there's been a lot over the years, and it triggers, as I'm talking to you, various things, and there's a plethora of stuff that we could be covering. So
No, of course, man. I mean, Rick, I can't tell you, thank you so much. I love talking with you. I mean, I've always enjoyed talking with you. You're just a wealth of knowledge. I'm excited to see your training program to come out, and I'd love to have you back on here to talk about a bunch of other subjects as we move forward. I'm
going to give you a freebie of basic ammonia awareness training. I'm going to do that video, but it requires that they have household ammonia on site. The best way to kill the fear, the biggest panic in a plant is when people smell ammonia, because everybody's heard all the horror stories. The way I calmed that up in Alaska, in fact, Mike Duckworth, who's a big shot for Silver Bay Seafoods, he said, I would have never been able to see this happening anywhere else. I put everybody in a room, 30-something people, all the management of Silver Bay Seafood's biggest plant up there right now, that's making all the money and taking over the industry. I helped commission that refrigeration system. And I gave them my little spiel on basic ammonia awareness and what ammonia is, what it's about. And then I took a cup of ammonia and I passed it around and made everybody take a deep breath and inhale the ammonia. Some people couldn't handle it. Some people were like, that's not so bad. You can see the tolerance difference in people. But what it did was created a calmness amongst people who were freaked out that now when they smell ammonia walking across the plant, they don't have to run for cover.
Yeah.
It's not, here it is. And then I explained to them that the cup that they're holding is 95% water and 5% ammonia.
Wow. Yeah.
Huh?
It sounds like that might scare them a little bit. as they
if
see
you
that.
smell the ammonia at that level, and you know that it's only 5%, and that's what I drive home and I talk about it, you're not as apt to be panicked about it.
Yeah.
No, I'm not saying get so comfortable that we rest on our laurels and become sloths in our own way. It definitely has its purpose, but making people aware.
Yeah. No, that's the battle right there, man. And well, Rick, thank you so much, man. I appreciate your time today. I really enjoyed my time with you, and I look forward to doing it again. And so, thank you.
All right, you have a good evening. We'll be talking.
All right, thank you, Rick. You take care.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.